This is something that is both a political and a policy challenge before us. And I think you're right to frame the question that you are, just in terms of where the American people are at, because I think that this is a place where Trump is trying to make it seem like a strength, but actually it's perhaps his biggest vulnerability here. It's very much a potential Achilles heel. Remember, he sold this to the American people saying that he will have the tariffs paid for by other people, not the American people. And that's the promise. It's very much kind of this, we'll make Mexico pay for the border wall, right? And so the challenge that he faces is a political and a policy problem. In his administration, there certainly are people that believe that this is the right policy, that this is the right approach for the United States to take a more protectionist, isolationist approach going forward. But there isn't consensus. I don't want you to think that there's consensus within the Trump administration about that. Most importantly, at the very top with the president and the vice president, whether it is these policies on tariffs or whether it's a speech here on the stage, they are not talking to you. That is, you are not the audience. They are talking to their base. They are talking to the Make America Great Again MAGA base. And they're trying to show this as a source of strength. The reason why is because 73% of Republicans or Republican-leaning Americans believe that Americans lose more than they gain when it comes to international trade. Now, there's a challenge, though, is because from this political standpoint, there's that, as I said, a vulnerability here. So, for instance, right now, as Americans see what Trump is doing, right now his approval rating is actually higher than it's ever been for him. But when it comes to the question of, is Trump doing enough on inflation and high costs, 66% of Americans right now are saying he is not doing enough. And when asked directly about tariffs, will tariffs raise prices or lower prices, 64% of Americans believe that it will raise prices on them. Only 14% believe it will lower prices. When asked about tariffs upon European nations, 60% of Americans disapprove of that. So I just raise that as saying this is a particular moment where it's important to understand the distinction between politics and policy. And as this moves forward, I urge you all to think about this. First and foremost, ensure that you do not think about this as a Washington consensus or a Trump administration consensus. Number two, as that April 1st deadline rises and gets closer, and I think that's very important for you to all remember that April 1st deadline for the reports to come back to Trump. To understand that your position, I think I advise you as you're thinking about this is something we think about, is do not try to embrace the status quo and protect the status quo. There should be an understanding that, look, some reforms or some changes are very much something to be considered. But then the third point is really try to articulate the harms that it will do, not just to your people, but to the American people, especially when it comes to manufacturing and supply chains. Understand the vulnerabilities that are out there and understand that the person who will ultimately make the decision about this, he's not ideological about this. He's not thinking about it from a policy standpoint, though some in his administration are. He's thinking about a political stance. And that political stance is deeply unpopular amongst the American people, and it is perhaps an extraordinary vulnerability on his part.